I want to go back and talk about how I got to where I am and why I have some concerns about the future of the human species and the planet. It's very, very hard everybody here is in really good shape. You know, this is not a cross-section of the world. This is a cross-section of the very top of the world. I mean, good to see you. I didn't get a chance to say hello to you, but there are 2,000 people here. I see a lot of people I know in the crowd. Anyway, when I was a young man, I concentrated on my business and my family and my yacht racing career because I didn't worry too much about the nation or the world because I didn't feel like I had much opportunity to make a difference or make an impact. It was out of my area of responsibility. Also, I was very young. And when you're very young, you know, you're usually thinking about, you're not thinking about global issues as much as you are more local issues, you know. At any rate, but in the 70s, when I decided to get on the satellite with the superstation and try and create a national network with my little UHF station in Atlanta, I thought, well, what would be nice? Home box office was already in existence. They had new movies, and I was carrying the Braves, the Hawks, and the Atlanta Flames hockey. We brought sports. It was long before there was an ESPN. And I said, what would be the next channel that people would like to see? And it hit me right in the face, a news channel, you know, where you could see news all the time. Because in those days, the news was only on at 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock in the Eastern Time Zone, 5 and 10 here in Chicago, the Central. So I thought that would be a good idea, and I was just amazed that from 1975, when I first came up with the idea, to about 1978, 4 years had passed. And I thought ABC, CBS, or NBC, who had the infrastructure, they already had news gathering all over the world. All they would have had to do is keep the lights on in the studio while, 24 hours a day and keep the cameraman working. You know, they had Dan Rather or Walter Cronkite was sitting there, and he was only working 22 minutes a day. He could work 4 or 5 hours like anybody else. It wouldn't have cost them hardly anything to do, but they had their head right in the sand. They were hoping that if they didn't do anything to help cable, maybe it would go away. So nobody was doing it. And by then, we had not really started to make money with the superstation. We were way ahead of our time, but somebody has to be first. And we were first, and we were surviving, and I could see that it was going to work. So I said, since nobody else is going to do it, I'll give it a try. I'll give news a try. And my previous journalistic experience consisted of selling newspapers in Cincinnati when I was 7 years old at the streetcar stop in the afternoon for a nickel apiece when people got off the streetcar. And I think I got a penny for each one I sold, and I'd sell maybe 10 a day. I was working my way through grade school. That's right. But that was my journalistic. But I said, and when I announced that I was going to do it, I got laughed at. They said, who is he to do news? And I said, well, I read the newspapers. I've watched the little television news. I said, what's it take to be a journalist? It's pretty damn simple. Looks pretty simple to me. I said, I've been interviewed a few times. It doesn't look like it's all that difficult. You got to have bureaus. You got cameras. You have to take pictures and ask questions, and then you assemble it in a place on videotape and run it. Get some anchors, somebody that can read. Tries the momentum. But let me tell you, this is the economic, one thing that we could do as a nation, and Chicago is right in the middle of everything. I always think of Chicago, that toddling town. They do things here they don't do on Old Broadway. One thing we could do is work hard to get a new economic system. We're working on an economic system that favors the destruction of the environment for the most part. For instance, if you have a forest and you go out and cut it down, you show that as gross national product and income. There's no debit for it. There should be, you have depreciation on equipment. Why isn't there depreciation on the natural world when we're drawing down natural resources, particularly those that aren't replaceable? Like a virgin forest is irreplaceable, and so is the Ogala aquifer. I mean, it'll take 1 million years to replenish it if we pull all the water out of it to irrigate the cornfields in Iowa. So, and for instance, instead of taxing income, and listen, I don't mind about paying taxes. I just gave $1 billion away. I mean, I'm shoveling it out the door faster than I'm making it. You can't take it with you. You might as well enjoy investing it, and I consider it an investment rather than giving it away. An investment in the future of humanity, that's not a bad thing to invest in, particularly if you've got children and you care about the future, and most people do. Not everyone does.
CNN and its imitators have been blamed for heightening competition for news to the point where excesses are more prevalent than ever. A case in point is the Monica Lewinsky case. An editorial in the March-April issue of the Columbia Journalism Review says, with the spread of 24-hour all-news cable channels, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, there's pressure to report news even when there isn't any. What do you think of that assessment?
I agree. It's a problem. It's a problem we have to live with. You know, if you're in a hurry, you're going to make mistakes sometime. But people, once you know, how you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? You know, people want news fast now, so we give it to them real fast, sometimes too fast. But we find out later and we correct it if we make a mistake.
That's probably the most truthful answer you're going to get from anybody who runs a big network. Might even apply to newspapers, and one can never imagine. You've supported some form of free airtime for candidates for federal office. Most people in the industry oppose this idea. The FCC chairman recently announced a delay in issuing a notice of proposed rulemaking on the subject. Could you explain your views and your reasons?
I have never espoused giving free advertising time to politicians or to anybody else, except for nonprofit organizations. I do feel like that the news media has a responsibility to interview candidates and wherever appropriate, so that the viewers can be informed, and it's a good use of news time, both or space in the newspapers to ask the candidates about how they feel about issues, so we can have an informed voters. That's what the media is supposed to do, but not free airtime for commercials. All they do is attack each other.
You've lived by the mantra, never look back. If we forced you to look back, what would you say is the one deal that got away?
I can't say because I might revive it.
One last question. You've met with Castro a number of times. Cuba's in the news as far as what we're doing with Cuba and peace between our countries and more understanding. How do you feel that's going to evolve, and some personal reflections on Castro? And that'll be our last question.
Well, that's the big subject too. At any rate, I believe that we should have diplomatic relations with everybody. We had diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union when we were about to go to war with them. We had diplomatic relations with China when Mao was the chairman. You know, Tricky Dick went over there and we established. You know, we didn't have relations with North Korea. We didn't have them with Vietnam, and we didn't have them with Cuba and Albania, but we've already normalized relations with Vietnam. We lost the war with them. Why haven't we normalized them with Cuba? If we want to see communism go away in Cuba, the best way to do it is send a lot of rich tourists down there to corrupt them. You know, American tourists. They'll corrupt very easily. Look at their baseball players. You know, communism doesn't give you any money. Everybody's poor in communism. And at least in capitalism, some people are rich. You know, and look at their baseball players. They want to get out. So we're doing everything absolutely wrong by not normalizing relations with Cuba. And And as far as Castro's concerned, I've been hunting and fishing with him, and he's a regular CNN viewer, and I never met a customer I didn't like.